kids. Right now, we're already sort of seeing what it's like. It's the first time our two have been here.
When you only do it once about every 3 years, it's not hard.
Testing. Hey everyone, thank you again for being here on our first Midweek Manna since the pandemic. It's my first Midweek Manna ever, so I'm excited to be here. Susan wishes she could be here, but she'll be back on Sunday. So I am privileged to introduce our speaker for this evening. So Dr. Donald Winslett is a licensed psychologist has been one for nearly 30 years, is the founder and director of the Center for Clergy Care and Education here in Pensacola, Florida. And as an ordained minister, he's also served as the director of clinical pastoral education over at Baptist. And over the years, he has trained over 500 pastors throughout the CPE model. I did my CPE at Baptist, fun fact. So we are really excited to have Dr. Winslett here to talk about emotional wellness. We're recording, by the way, just so everyone knows.
So behave.
Me or y'all?
More just, it's not live, but we'll post it later. So just, yeah.
Handouts. We went to a lot of trouble to do the handout.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I might have to make some more copies. We were trying to figure out guesstimate. So people, if couples want to share, and then I'll get more to you in a second. So, start those.
Give one more wine. I got you
We'll
first.
pass around there.
Okay.
I'm going to go print some more.
Y'all will take one and pass it to the next.
What you should be receiving is an outline and several,
I got two.
I think 5 or 6 pages from the National Institutes of Health. Let's see.
6 pages stapled, and the other is a single page.
Yeah, 6 pages stapled. That's right. They're stapled.
I'm gonna go make, I 35 copies, it looks like we're arriving around 4
Let me say a couple things while we are getting settled with all the handouts. I am always delighted to be at St. Christopher's, and I want you to know that. I started the Center for Clergy Care in 2010 or so. You may or may not know this, but for the last 4 or 5 years, St. Christopher has been a financial supporter of the center. And so when Susan told me that she could offer me an honorarium for being here, I said absolutely not. This is my gift back to you for your support of our work. I wish I'd only been in practice 30 years. It's been 40. And I wish there was only 500 students, or 700, but a lot of Episcopals along the way. I have a very deep and abiding relationship with your bishop, and do a lot of work for him in the context of the diocese. And I'm delighted to be here. I love this parish, I love your staff, and I'm honored to be here. So I want you to know that, how grateful I am for your presence in my life. One of the things I want to say first, everything we talk about now seems to be in the context of a pandemic. Okay, day, and so that becomes the backdrop for everything we talk about. I told someone the other day, next pandemic, we're gonna know exactly what to do. Okay? There not gonna be any questions about any of this. We're gonna know what to do, so we're good, okay? And maybe we're getting to be on the other side of it. Nothing I do in my office can be measured. And so when we talk about emotional wellness, or next week when you talk about, I think it's spiritual health and physical health and the fourth one, we really can't measure anything that we do. And so I go see my cardiologist. He can tell me everything there is to tell me about my heart. Okay? So we're going to talk in some general themes, which may fit and may not fit. One of the things I want to do is I want to normalize whatever is happening in our lives. I'm not going to change culture tonight. There may be a possibility that I can change one person's mind or help someone to look at their life differently or something about their life differently. The interesting part for me is that there's still unnecessary and significant stigmas related to mental health challenges. And what's interesting to me is that there are so many cardiovascular diseases that are preventable. And yet there are no stigmas attached to that. There are so many cancer diagnoses that are preventable. And there is no stigma attached to that. There are so many diabetic conditions that are preventable, and there is no stigma attached to that. But begin talking about mental health issues, and the language is really, really rude, and sometimes violent, and terribly inappropriate. You're crazy as hell. You need to double up on your medicine. Did you forget your medicine today? You're off the chain. We would never say that to a cardiac patient or an oncology patient or a diabetic patient, but we say it to someone who's experiencing mental health challenges. I wish we could do something about that. We have come a long way. I'm not going to offer this group because somebody's going to know the answer. 1972, the Democrat presidential candidate was 1972. McGovern. Who was his running mate? You younger crowds, I say, I take you to Jackson's. This bunch, no. 1972, who was his running mate? Who won the election? Nixon. Popular vote? 72%. McGovern had 28%. Who was McGovern's running mate? Well, he had two. The first running mate was Thomas Eagleton, senator from the Show Me State of Missouri. In July of the campaign before the November election, it came out that he, past tense, had been treated for depression. And he was forced off the ticket. Anybody remember that? Okay. What happened? They brought in Sergeant Shriver. Maria Shriver's father was governor of Maryland. And it didn't matter. Nixon was going to win the election. But in 1972, we forced someone off the vice president ticket because he, past tense, had been treated for depression. In 1990, in the state of Florida, we had a gentleman elected governor who was being treated for depression, Prozac, 60 milligrams a day, every day. 1990. Long Childs. And he was elected, and he was re-elected, and every day he served in office, he took 60 milligrams of Prozac every day. Now, national, state, big difference, except Florida is really rather cosmopolitan. So it says something about what happened in 18 years, from 72 to 90. But we're not there yet. And part of why we're not there yet is because we can't measure anything. Okay? And so sometimes we have to work backwards to get at what we're trying to get at. I feel better saying all that, okay? So thank you. I just wasted 11 minutes of your life to feel better. And we'll be through about 7, and we'll have time for questions. We finish at 7:15, right?
Correct.
Good. Promise you. We'll be out of there by then. Bernard of Clairvaux, at a very young age, before 30, Clairvaux refers to a monastery in France. Bernard was kind of ordained by the Roman Catholic Church to be a reformer and to decide who qualified to enter into monastic life. The unfortunate part of what he did, while in many ways brilliant, it was only working with males, okay? Those of you who've had Psychology 101, Eric Erickson, Developmental Stages, he only studied males. Very few people know that. There were no females involved in that whole trust versus mistrust and all of that, developmental stages. But what he did was he observed the spiritual development of literally hundreds of men who believed they felt a call to monastic life. And it applies to us right here, now, tonight. He developed this fourfold continuum of what we call spiritual development. The first stage, and this is part of your outline, the first stage is what Bernard called the love of self for self's sake. This is that infantile position where my life is bounded north, south, east, and west by a concern for me and only me. First word that perhaps comes to mind is narcissism. But this is where we all begin our human journey. Babies make one sound and get all of their needs met. This is where we all begin our human journey. We are aware of our needs and we are aware of nothing else. The psychological term, narcissism, egocentricity. Love of self for self's sake. Bernard said the second stage was love of God for self's sake. So the reality is outside of oneself, but very much still focused on me. And what Bernard said was, most people in their spiritual development end at this stage. Love of God for self's sake. The goal is to turn everything around us into a means for self-chosen ends. We love God for what God can do for us. Audio tape your prayers for a month and go back and listen to all your prayers. For most of us, they are very much stage 2 prayers. Bernard's third stage is really a huge leap forward. And he calls it the love of God for God's sake. This is when one senses that God has value, has intrinsic value for who God is. And this is about worship. This is about ecstasy. This is about wonder. This is about when we find something that is greater than ourselves and we are drawn to that. The love of God for God's sake. What's still amazing for me, and I've taught this 50 times, there's a fourth stage. Bernard said the fourth stage is the love of self for God's sake. The love of self for God's sake. Perhaps shocking, I think it represents the insight and wisdom of a man who at this time was like 28 when he did this work. Think for a moment. Who is the most difficult person on this planet for you to love? Whom do you have the most trouble accepting, affirming, embracing, celebrating? You probably have to admit that it's you. So Bernard says that the love of self for God's sake is the highest stage of spiritual development. Being able to regard our own creation the way Genesis says God regards it, as something good, very good. Had an old professor in seminary, pastoral care guy, who was talking one day about something he was doing, and he realized he'd gotten a bit carried away, and he stopped and he said, "He who tooteth not his own horn getteth his horn not tooteth." The love of self for God's sake. What does it mean to be emotionally healthy? I've got a cartoon in my office that was framed. Originally, it was a New York Times cartoon that kind of morphed into a greeting card. And if you can imagine yourself standing at the very back of the Sanger, and the curtain is closed, and you see the back of a head, and the back of a head, and the back of a head, these 3 or 4 people who are sitting alone. And the banner reads, "Welcome to the annual convention of the adult children of normal families." There were 4 people there. So we're not sure what that looks like. Okay? There are a lot of definitions for emotional well-being. Let's use this one. The ability to regulate emotions, such as coping with stressors, and communicate with the ability to identify needs and maintain social contact. What does that mean? It means that I have achieved a level of self-awareness that I recognize what I am feeling. I know what I do well. I know what I don't do well. I know what my impact is on others. And I'm aware of all of this. It means that I have the ability to manage myself. We live in a world of conflict, and that's not about the pandemic, that is the world we live in. So one aspect of emotional health is that I have learned how to use conflict appropriately, and I can honor those negative and disruptive emotions and it's okay. I would venture to say that no one in this office, no one in this room, learned healthy conflict management in your family of origin. Okay? I didn't. So it's not something we get. Okay? Several years ago, and I realized that only when you do this can you get somewhat comfortable with it. Several years ago, Sandra and I were sitting down at Cactus Flower during the week one night having dinner, just two of us. I happened to be facing the door. And a couple, friends of ours from First Pres, where we worship, walked in, known them forever. Our kids grew up together. And they walked over and I said hi to her. She said hi to me. He started talking to Sandra and they talked and they walked away. He never acknowledged me. And so I said to Sandra, I said, did you notice that? And she said, well, oh, what? I said, yeah. Well, I know me, okay? I am going to tote that around forever. So the next morning, I did some different things in my morning. Know where his office, knew he's not there. I knew where his office was. I knew he got to work early like I did. I got in my car, I drove downtown, I parked in his parking lot. I walked in, front door was unlocked by the grace of God. Door to his office was open. Knocked on the door. Said, hey, come in, sit down. He said, what's going on? I said, last night. At Cactus Flower. Your wife and I spoke. Your wife spoke to Sandra. You and Sandra had a conversation about 5 minutes. And you walked off. I'm curious to know if I've done something to offend you. And he said, not at all. I said, Joe, honest name, I'm going to give you one more chance. Have I done something to offend you? He said, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've been accused of this before. He said, I am so sorry. I apologize. I said, great. He thanked me for coming in. I know enough about me to know I would carry that around. But the problem is, there'd be another 10 or 12 of those things that I would carry around. And guess when they all kind of come to a head, guess who gets them? And so there's this Mount St. Helens, because she fixed an omelet and didn't scramble the eggs, or something huge, and it all comes out. So I know enough about myself, what I'm feeling, what I do with the feelings, and how I need to manage those feelings. Social awareness. Consider the feelings of others. A buddy of mine up at Vanderbilt, a guy named Yako Haman, has been down like 5 times to visit with clergy. In fact, we were sitting in a restaurant one night, the pastor walked in and spoke to him and not me, so maybe it is about me. But he's written a book, and in the book he cites a University of Michigan study that says that college students today are 62% less empathic than college students 30 years ago. Now, I've never seen the study. I don't know how they did the research. But he says in the book, and we had this conversation, what's this about? He said, well, college students today, first, they were born into a world that everything important to them started with an I. iPhone, iPad, iPod, iMac, iBook. This guy told a funny story. His wife had all that for her birthday. What did he say? He bought her an Iron. That didn't go over well. But they also have never known a world of peace because they're 9/11 babies. And so what has happened, the study believes, is that these kids have turned in with this. And it has minimized their ability to learn how to write letters. I asked a 24-year-old guy yesterday, do you know what a stamp is? Literally. He said, yeah, I think I got one. Okay. We have lost, and not just college kids, okay? Part of social awareness, part of emotional well-being is the ability to consider the feelings of others. And so that morning when I went to see Joe, he did say, I guess that hurt. That would hurt me. Empathy is very different from sympathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone for whatever has happened in their life. Empathy is the ability to feel what it must be like to be in that person's shoes. And one of the things we maintain is that people who are emotionally healthy have a much better ability to be empathic. Relationship management. I have a much better ability to negotiate what I feel in order to be in a relationship with others. I can make this real easy. There are only 5 feelings. And what we believe is that any time of the day we're feeling one of those 5. Angry, happy, sad, scared, jealous. There are 5,000 words for anger. Okay? And one of the most difficult things I do is try to help people identify and negotiate their emotions. And then you get into the world of ambivalence, which is 2 intense emotions that are focused on the same event. Taking a child to college. The happiness and the fear. I had to go see an ENT the other day around the corner from my office, and we had never met. We kind of worked with folks along the way, and he knew me and I knew him. And he said, he walked in, he said, hey, I said, hi. He said, you're a psychologist, right? And I said, yeah. He said, I've always wanted to ask you. I said, what's that? He said, how do you feel? I said, well, right now, I'm scared. How do you deal with the emotions? So, that definition, the ability to regulate emotions, to cope with stressors, and to communicate with the ability to maintain social contact. How do we do that? I'm going to talk about two things here, and then we're going to look at these checklists. One of the things we know about mindfulness is that every time you say something bad about yourself to yourself, I'm not good at this, I don't like this, whatever. One of the things we believe is that there are these neurological pathways that just continue to get burned. And it's like a rut in a muddy road. And you're never going to get out of it unless you do something different. And the interesting thing is now that the neurology people are telling us that these pathways can be eliminated if you stop that behavior, if you stop that self-effacing conversation. Those pathways can be eliminated. That's the good news. But in our world of everything now, they estimate it takes somewhere around 14 months. But it can happen. We talk a lot about people, back to Bernard, and where are you, and what do you do with love of self for God's sake? Scripture says you're salt and you're light. It doesn't say you're salt if you do this and this and this and this. You're light if you do this. You're salt and you're light. But we don't believe it. We really don't believe it. So we talk about mindfulness as a way to begin to have conversations about these issues and begin to rewire. One of the things we know about journaling, we're going to talk more about that in a minute, seen some really amazing things happen with people who go on over to Target or somewhere and get a notebook and begin to journal. Something happens that's very different from thinking about it or thinking about it and talking about it. Something happens when we begin to write that we have feelings and we have thoughts that we'll never get to unless we're journaling. And so I have people who struggle with these issues. I go see Henry Langhorne, and this is how the process works. It's 80% on him to figure out what's going on with me. And it's 20% on me to do whatever it is he tells me to do. But he's got to do the work, 80%. You come in my office, it's exactly reverse. It's 80% on you and 20% on me. That's just the way it is. Now, a great psychiatrist was asked one time, what's the difference between a psychotic and a neurotic? And she said, well, psychotic says 1 + 1 = 3. And a neurotic says 1 + 1 = 2, but I don't like it. When I tell you that it's 80% on you, you don't like it. It's 80% on you. That's the way it is. So I have people begin and then bring in, and we talk about those events that produce those moods, and they begin to understand something of how they operate. I love to have people keep a food journal. People hate to keep food journals. We're going to talk about that. Keep a food journal for 2 weeks. Every M&M. Everything you you will be amazed. And these are the things that help to contribute one way or another to your mood. Let's look at these checklists. First one is emotional wellness, brighten your outlook. I'm not going to read that. You can read that later. Go down to explore your beliefs about the meaning and purpose of life. Ansley and John and Ann and some others have already heard the story I used recently in a homily in a memorial service. There's this great story, Rabbi Abraham Heschel, Polish-American rabbi, author, theologian. He tells this great story about this rabbi who was traveling home by foot in this war-torn country, and a guard abruptly stops him and says, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I'm a rabbi and I live right over the hill and I'm on my way home. But if you would come by my house every morning and ask those two questions, I would be most grateful and I'd be glad to pay for it. Who are you? What are you doing here?" Those two questions, since I heard this story, have haunted me. Who are you and what are you doing here? And until we figure that out, I'm not sure where we're going to get with all of these other issues. We talk about reducing stress. We talk about going to pain management. We talk about doing stress management. We never tell someone to go to a pain prevention clinic or a stress prevention clinic. You're going to have stress. Back to, how do you manage anger, happy, sad, scared, jealous? How do you negotiate all that gnarly stuff that lives deep within? How do you reduce your stress? Most of us are not getting good sleep. Most of us know next to nothing about sleep hygiene. Basically, we talk about eliminating caffeine after 12 noon. We talk about going to bed at the same time every night. We talk about not eating a heavy meal after 6 p.m. We talk about limiting alcohol to 1 to 2. I had a guy the other day, and I said, "How much do you drink?" And he said, "I drink 2 cocktails a night." And I said, "Do you pour, do you measure?" He said, "I measure 2 fingers." Those of you who laugh understand what I mean. This is what we mean by 2 fingers. He said, so he was drinking 3 to 4 cocktails a night. Okay. Alcohol is going to mess up your sleep every time. What do most of us do? We got the iPad in front of us. And one of the things we know is that it sends all these signals and it just stimulates us. And so what do my patients do? They can't sleep. They roll over, get their iPad, and lay in bed and read. Well, let's just go ahead and stay up. Vacuum. Do something, because you're not going to get back to sleep. If I could get everybody in my office 7 to 8 hours of restful sleep every night, I would cut my practice by a third. Poor sleep artificially stimulates hunger. It makes us ineffective. As we continue to not sleep well, we begin this self-fulfilling prophecy, I'm not going to sleep well tonight, and we get into this cycle, and it is awful. So there's a sheet there about sleep. Also see a bunch of retired people, and they sleep 4 hours a night, and I say, do you nap? And they say, yeah. And I say, what are your naps? They say, well, I take 2 2-hour naps a day. Well, you're getting your 8 hours. Just, you get it in 3 chapters. So, stop. Cope with loss, which is the ability to negotiate and manage feelings, sadness. Okay. We are a nation of grievers. Okay? Back to where we started. 1,900 people die every day in this country of cardiovascular disease. 1,700 people die every day in this country of cancer-related diseases. Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in our country, requiring volunteer care amounting to, if we put it in dollars and cents, $245 billion a year in unpaid care for Alzheimer's patients. 8,000 people in this country die every day. 130 suicides every day. And then I have a granddaughter who didn't get to go to junior senior prom. And my daughter-in-law is a travel advisor, and she had to cancel 50 trips for people overseas. Everybody is grieving something. And part of emotional wellness is the ability to talk about that and manage that and acknowledge that and cope with that. One of the things that's interesting is that in our diagnostic handbook, okay, we've got all these pages about depressive disorder. And I have to have 5 of 9 or whatever. But it talks about sleep and mood and appetite and activities and pleasure and suicide and all that. But then down at the bottom, it says you can make a diagnosis of major depressive disorder unless the person is experiencing exhausting and unremitting grief. Here, this is an observation and not a judgment. There are a lot of people who go to their PCP, a primary care provider, and they talk about all these things, and nobody ever says, tell me about the last 3 months. And so nobody says, my spouse died. My house burned down. My kid's deployed, I'm scared to death. And so what happens is the person gets put on an antidepressant because they meet the criteria. But that's about as useful as me not having a headache and taking a Tylenol. I'm not going to know I have anything in me doing anything because there's nothing for the Tylenol to do. So we're also a nation of people who don't like to talk about our pain. And so we don't like to talk about our grief. And that's a huge problem. one of the first things I do is we talk about losses. You better find somebody to love you. Even if you have to pay somebody to love you, you better find somebody to love you and talk about these things. We need to build social connections. Only because I've done so much work in groups and lived in groups and dealt with myself in groups and interacted openly and honestly was I able to go that morning and see Joe. And I really didn't care how it went. The issue was I needed to take care of me. Okay? I didn't have an outcome in mind other than taking care of me. These are good handouts. Take them. But I'm going to encourage you to do something with them because we're getting down to number 6. The other part of this presentation was about resilience, is about resilience. What does it mean to be resilient? Hundreds of definitions. To be able to withstand or recover from difficult conditions, to recoil or spring back into shape after bending, stretching, or being compressed. We are all going to take hits. That is not negotiable. Part of emotional health is that I have the ability to acknowledge that hit and allow myself to feel that pain and go to my pastor and talk about that pain. Or go to my friends and talk about that pain and deal with it and acknowledge it. And that helps me to recover. That helps me to be resilient. And I'm an introvert. I'm an absolute card-carrying introvert. And when we finish, I will be exhausted. Okay? And so it's hard for me to do that. But I know that the options are not good because I know what happens when I don't do that. My anger gets wonky. I get inappropriate. I get passive aggressive. And I do all sorts of things that I really don't want to do. All of this is a process. If you understand Scripture like I do, salvation is a process. It's not an event. First the seed, then the blade, then the flower. Everything is a process. So we can't just do these things for a week. If we've never done these things, it is really hard. So what I encourage people to do is to take these handouts and put these handouts where you can see them and where you can live with them and when you can take a nugget from here or there, or I need to work on this, I need to do this, and begin to pay attention to that. Not many of us are good at practicing Sabbath. It is not a suggestion. Tell you who struggles with this the most. clergy. Because your Sabbath is not their Sabbath. And so somebody has a pastoral need on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday. Or they're not good at it anyway. I would encourage you to enter into the process of practicing Sabbath. I would encourage you to go back up to where we started and pay a lot of attention to love of self for God's sake. We have 8 minutes for questions. Yes?
I just want to thank you. I am very open about my PTSD, my use disorder. Because of that, I'm speaking about faith and, I'm very open that I have PTSD and mood disorder professionally, and because of that, I am speaking about mental health and spirituality at events, so you just kind of wrote my speech for me. But I wanted to ask, what do you mean by we are the salt and the light? I kind of get the light part, but what does the salt mean?
I'm just quoting Jesus.
I know, but I don't know what it means.
Basic, you are salt. You are a basic, necessary part of life.
Okay,
Salt. We can't do without salt.
that's all I want. Thank you.
Good question. I've never had that question before. Thank you. And it's not conditional. It's you are.
For somebody who's otherwise pretty emotionally healthy, who goes through a extreme loss of a loved one,
The loss of.
a loved one, how can we get back on track? I've talked to Susan about this, and she's given me some ideas, but it's really hard to do all these self-care things that emotionally healthy people do when you feel like your whole world's
When you're in so much pain.
yeah.
Great question. If there was one answer or one pill, I'd give it to you. And I think I have to go back and say, it is a process. It's something you keep doing. It's something you keep sandpapering away. Trust the process. All of our grief gurus, and it's, we can no more say about a grief process how long it will take than an oncologist can say how long a patient can live. I think oncologists now are saying things like hours to days, days to weeks, weeks to months, because they don't know, okay? But one of the things Kubler-Ross said was a significant loss, okay? Can take up to 18 months before you don't feel that elephant on your chest, okay? But that doesn't mean that you go from here in enormous pain to here on the first day of the 19th month. It is, hopefully it's kind of like an escalator that you continue to feel better and better. My dad died when I was in college. He was 50 and I was 19. And it was a good, I was first semester sophomore. It was a good end of junior year before I felt right again. Okay? And so I think what we have to do, what I really know we have to do, is we have to stay in touch with people around us who can support us and love us and help us to deal with that pain. Okay, there is no quick fix. And there are days that all of us wish we were surgeons. Okay? This is slow and painful? And it's a great question. I know some of you have read Julia Norwich. I would highly recommend Matthew Fox's book, who wrote during a pandemic, and she talks about the ability to acknowledge and live with the pain, and the need to acknowledge and live with the joy. And either she says it or Fox writes it. The only way we understand light is because we've experienced darkness. Okay.
I don't understand under the four things for Bernard. I don't understand the C. Love of God for God's sake. Doesn't that imply that God needs our love? I didn't know that God needed anything. Doesn't God have everything? Why does he need our love? Am I making sense?
You make great sense.
Okay.
I don't believe it communicates anything about what God needs. I think it communicates my ability to get into a place of awe and wonder about the goodness and majesty and power of God. It's about me, it's not about God.
But he does say for God's sake.
It does. Okay, good point, thank you. Yeah, I'm curious about, where's the question come from?
I just wonder.
Okay. It's a better question than answer. Thank you.
Oh, okay, okay.
Did you have the same question?
The one that
Okay,
Sarah had.
okay.
Other questions? Oh, wait.
So, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. We've all heard that. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. What are you supposed to do? In this work-driven society that we've been brought up in, what do you do?
Well, I think it's about rest, okay? And so if I run a 10K, that can be about rest. If someone reads all day, that can be about rest. If I cook all of my lunches for the coming week, that could be about rest. If we go watch the new James Bond movie, that could be about rest. I think it depends on what those things are. For me is, I'm not going to my office to sit with people. I'm not going to deal with insurance companies. I'm not going to do those things that I don't want. I've got to get away from that. Okay.
Thank you.
Piggyback off of that, being a preacher's kid, without getting into a lot of detail, of course, the ultimate question is, what do you tell your clergy? As you said, they're essentially a 24/7 job, and it might be insightful to her question, is what kind of advice do you give to those who are shepherds of the flock?
Are you asking me, what do I say to clergy?
Roughly, I mean, what do you, as much as you want.
Well, there are two here. So I'll have this conversation with Ansley, okay? And this kind of gets into an issue that I'm really passionate about, okay? This is not research driven, this is kind of my experience. 98% of all clergy do not have a pastor. They don't have what I'm inviting you to have. Okay, and so part of the mission of the center is to provide a safe place for clergy. Okay. and we talk about the same kinds of things that we're talking about here tonight. And I think it's important. What month is this? October. If there are 5,000 people ordained to gospel ministry this month, across the board, Presbyterians, Lutherans, okay, in October of 2026, only 2,500 of those clergy will still be active in ministry. We have an attrition rate of 50% in 5 years. And part of it is because of all this that we're talking about. Let's have one. That's not a happy question to end on. Is there one more question? Right.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I have to talk about grief and mental health, and I don't have a lot of hope for the speech I'm about to give. So, can you give me a nugget? Like, how do I just inspire people when I don't I call Barbara Crafton when I am a little lost, and we just kind of, because she deals with depression too, and we just kind of talk about it, and I'm just like, how am I supposed to inspire people in a pandemic when we're all just grieving? What do I do?
Is there any faith-based to any of this?
Yes, it's all Christian spirituality.
Part of Julian's mantra, which for me is inspiring, so I don't know what inspires other people. But part of the mantra was, God never promised you you will not be troubled. God never promised you you will not be tempted. God never promised you that you'll not be distressed. God only promised you that you will not be overcome. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi to Susan.
Yes. Again, I'll post, I'll get with Jessica, and hopefully this will be uploaded to our YouTube, and then we'll share it. So if there are parts that you want to hear again, or you want to share with a friend or someone, Dr. Winslett has allowed us to record it and share that. So look out for that. We'll be back next week. We'll be looking at the mind. So I'll be leading that session. I do not have the same background as Dr. Winslett, but I hope y'all will come and we'll explore. And the week after that, we're looking at the body with our parish nurse. And we'll end with the spirit with Susan, with Mother Susan. So it'll be a great series. We started off with the best, and we're looking forward to it. So thank y'all.